Okay, hello. You're all very welcome to today's presentation. So today's presentation was given at the National Beef Conference on the 19th of November. It was given by Dr. Eoin Ryan from the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine. And Owen gave a presentation called Bluetongue, What are the risks for Irish cattle farmers and what can we do about it? So Owen qualified as a vet from University College Dublin in 2002. He worked in mixed practice and then completed a PhD in foot and mouth disease in the Pilbright Institute, UK. He has worked for the UN Food and Agriculture Organization and in various roles in the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine. And he currently heads up the National Disease Control Centre with the department. So you're very welcome, Owen. Thanks for giving this presentation and thanks for giving it at the Beef Conference.
Thank you very much, Pierce. I was delighted to be invited to speak, and it's a great opportunity. And hopefully, I can provide people with a little bit of information about a major threat to Irish cattle and sheep farming.
Great. Okay, so if you want to share your slides, Owen, we'll kick off.
Great. Okay. Well, hello to everybody watching at home. As Pierce said, my name is Eoin Ryan. I work in the Department of Agriculture. I'm the head of the National Disease Control Centre. And one of the things that my colleagues and I are responsible for is keeping exotic diseases out of Ireland and preparing to deal with them if they do come in. And something that is particularly on our mind at the moment is bluetongue. So I'd like to talk today about what the risks are for Irish cattle farmers and what we can do about it. So why is bluetongue a problem? Bluetongue is a serious viral disease affecting sheep, goats, and cattle. It also affects camelids. It's spread mainly by biting midges, and those midges are present in Ireland. There's at least 24 different serotypes of bluetongue. That means different strains of the virus. But the reason why it's particularly a problem at the moment is a new strain, bluetongue virus 3, has been spreading across Northern Europe in 2023 to 2024. And unfortunately, a second new strain, bluetongue virus 12, has recently appeared in the Netherlands. If bluetongue reaches Ireland, we can expect significant losses in the cattle and sheep sectors. Now, there is one very important point I want to make. Bluetongue does not infect humans, and there is no food safety risk. But while it doesn't infect humans, it certainly affects humans, and particularly the farmers who watch their cattle and sheep become ill and in some cases die following infection. And on that point, I thought I'd start by talking about the impact of bluetongue on farmers in Europe, and it's been very significant. So these are just a few shots from news stories in the press. In Belgium, there was a quote that, last week Agriculture Minister David Clarenval stated the virus had already killed about 23,000 sheep and 36,000 cattle. That's a very significant amount of losses. And behind each one of those is a farmer who owns them and who came out to watch their animals become ill and die. In Germany, a quote from the paper, ever since the bluetongue virus struck a year ago, German farmer Ortran Humpert has been caring for 6 sheep to contain a crisis and feels increasingly abandoned. He's been raising sheep since 1986 and lost 140 of her 500 sheep. It was a disaster waiting to happen, she sighed. This is having a real impact on farmers. For instance, in Belgium, the mortality in 2024 versus 2023 was increased by 191% in sheep and by an increase of 35% in cattle. So a huge impact on people just like you doing their best to make a living from cattle and sheep farming. This Dutch farmer had a very unfortunate experience with it. This is another story where he spoke to the newspapers about it. One sheep dribbles, another limps, a third can barely stand. Eric van Norrel was reported as saying he lost 80 animals in total. The situation was desperate. There was nothing I could do. It's cost him tens of thousands of euros and had a huge impact on his business. So a very unfortunate story. And this is what I mean when I say bluetongue doesn't infect humans, but it certainly affects humans. So a huge impact. Um, a few numbers about what's happened in the Netherlands when bluetongue first appeared in autumn 2023. There was 55,000 sheep died in the first 4 months and over 5,000 flocks were affected. And if you're interested in looking at the details, our Dutch colleagues published a very useful analysis of this. It's in Preventive Veterinary Medicine and it's available online. You can have a look at it if you like. And they've compared the sheep mortalities, before and after bluetongue appeared. And look, that story speaks volumes. And you can see the graph, the increase in cases and mortalities. So very significant impact. The question for us then is, What can Irish cattle farmers do to reduce the risk of bluetongue coming to Ireland? Well, the first thing we want to do is try to keep bluetongue out if we can. So the advice that we would give is, first of all, don't import cattle if you have that option to do so, and don't import bovine semen or embryos. If you avoid doing those things, you're reducing the risk of bringing it in. Now, if you do choose to import cattle or germinal products, despite this advice, it's really important to comply with all the preventive measures in place. And also, please take note that compensation will not be paid for cattle detected with bluetongue post-import or infected by imported germinal products. The other important thing that we can do to reduce the risk of bluetongue in Ireland is to respond rapidly to the first cases. Think of bluetongue as being like a forest fire. It's far easier to deal with if you can deal with it quickly at the start before it spreads. If you suspect bluetongue virus, please report it quickly. We do have a chance now to stop any incursion in Ireland, but only if we detect it and act fast. If it has spread widely before we find our first case, control is likely to be very challenging. Now, Ireland actually has a chance. We're the last country in Northern and Western Europe that doesn't have bluetongue. And if we do get an incursion, if we find it early, if it's reported to us quickly, we actually do have a chance to prevent it spreading. But we really do need people to report it for us to be able to do that. So rapid response. So what should you look out for? These are the things that you should watch out for in your cattle or sheep if you sheep as well. Fever, loss of appetite, a reddening of the mucous membranes. That's the gums and those areas in the mouth. Sores on the nose, the gums, the dental pads. A swelling of the face and the lips and the tongue. So the word bluetongue is comes from this bluish tinge they can get to the tongue. The virus actually affects the cells lining the blood vessels, and because of that, the tissue can become this kind of purpley color, and in some animals the tongue looks almost kind of purpley blue, and that's where the word bluetongue comes from. But that's not the only sign. They can also have breathing difficulties, drooling, a discharge from the eyes or nose. They can become lame. They can have abortions or deformed lambs or fetuses or calves. And in severe cases, death. So there's some photos from the Purbright Institute on the right, the classic bluetongue, and also ulceration on the gums there. Here's some more photos of what to look out for in sheep on the left and in cattle on the right. So the classic signs of conjunctivitis, nasal discharge, that reddened eyes, the kind of burnt muzzles, the erosion of the skin around the nose, and a cow with a swollen udder and crusting of the teats. But also, it's worth looking at the sheep as well. I think a lot of cattle farmers have sheep too, and it would be wrong of me not to mention the signs in sheep. So similarly, that kind of swollen face, nasal discharge, and sore feet. These are some photos from our Dutch colleagues. Of course, we have never had bluetongue in Ireland, and as a result, we don't have any photos of Irish animals with bluetongue, luckily for now. So we're reliant on photos kindly shared by our colleagues in other countries who have had this unfortunate experience. And there you can see these classic signs of Dutch cattle affected by it. The erosions of the teats, the burnt muzzle, those erosions in the gums and dental pads, and the sore feet. It's a classic bluetongue experience, and that's what farmers, just like you, have unfortunately seen in their cattle in the Netherlands. And our Dutch colleagues published a very nice paper in the Veterinary Record, and I'd encourage you, if you're interested, to look it up online. You can have a look at the details of what their experiences were, but they included some photographs, and this is a sheep with a classic kind of swollen head, and those erosions on the dental pad again, something to watch out for. So how does bluetongue spread? Well, mainly it spreads by biting midges, the Culicoides species, which are present in Ireland. So the midges that spread it do live here. That's the principal way in which it spreads. It can also spread by semen and embryos from infected animals. So if an infected animal is used as a semen donor, that semen can be infectious in similar embryos, and that's why we talk about germinal products presenting a risk. If infected animals are moved to new areas, they can bring the infection with them. And also, pregnant animals can pass infection to the fetus, which can then spread infection after birth. In other words, the pregnant animal is infected, maybe she recovers, and then a couple of months later gives birth. And if she's moved to a new area, or even perhaps if people think the infection is passed in that area, that infected animal, when it's born, can initiate a new phase of infection. The virus can also overwinter via infected animals. So it can survive through the winter in pregnant animals, areas with mild weather, and midges surviving the winter. A point to make with Bluetongue is it's not contagious in the sense that an infected animal in a pen can't directly pass infection on to its neighbor. It spreads via these biting midges, not via nose-to-nose contact. So it's not contagious in that sense. But of course, we have a huge number of midges, and when midges are active, it's very easy for infection to spread very quickly over very long distances. This slide from a publication by Peirce et al. From 2005 sets out the Bluetongue transmission cycle. And really, there's two factors to consider with this. First of all, there's the infection within the host, within the bovine or the ovine. And second of all, there's the cycle within the midge. So if you start at the top left with the infective host, this is an infected ruminant, so it could be a cow or a sheep, whatever. And a midge bites this animal. And the midge then flies off, and it becomes infected. And it takes between 4 and 20 days for the virus to replicate in that midge. That's called the extrinsic incubation period. So it's not immediately infective. So if a midge bites an infected animal, it can't pass infection on an hour later or 2 hours later. It takes a little bit of time for the virus to infect that midge and replicate. And that extrinsic incubation period can be as short as 4 days or as long as 20 days. It depends on things like temperature. After the virus has replicated in the midge, that midge can then go and bite another animal and spread that infection onwards. And that's how infection transmits. So the animal then becomes infected. There's a period during which it's developing a viremia, so the virus is replicating in the cow or the sheep, and the bull, the bullock, whatever it might be, the ram. And during that period, the virus replicates, and after, at least 2 to 4 days, be up to a week, then the animal is infectious again. So that's the cycle, and that's why Bluetongue takes a little bit of time to spread. It's temperature dependent, but when it's hotter, it spreads more quickly. So just getting into a little bit more detail about that transmission, this extrinsic incubation period is between 4 and 20 days in the midge. And what's critically important for us to understand is that replication can only occur when the temperature is above 12 degrees. Now that's an average of 12 degrees for the day. Midges will remain active above 4 degrees, but the virus won't replicate in them unless it's above 12 degrees on average over the course of a day. What that means for us is when the temperatures drop in the winter, the virus is no longer able to replicate in midges. Even if you see a few midges around, the virus won't be able to replicate in them. Now we all know hard frost will kill most midges, but we also all know there's plenty of parts where it might be mild winter, or you could go into a shed and find a few midges have survived. They can become very, very quiet at low temperatures, but they mightn't all die, especially if you're in a nice warm shed. We've always had that. We've all had that experience of finding a few floating around in January or February. The midges are infected for life. They don't get over Bluetongue. There's fewer midges in cold weather. And for this reason, we consider November to March to be vector-free periods, by which we mean from November to March, generally speaking, midges are not going to be around very much, and if they are, it's too cold for them to transmit the virus. So we're now into November, and we don't expect midges to be able to transmit Bluetongue in Ireland if we were to have an incursion until, I'd say, at least April. So looking at what's happening internationally, this is what our colleagues, farmers in other countries, have had to deal with. Bluetongue 3 was first detected in the Netherlands in September 2023, and very quickly it spread to over 6,000 holdings. It spread to Belgium and Germany, and it then successfully overwintered in those countries. Remember I said that while the midges mightn't be transmitting infection in the winter, and many of them die, Bluetongue can survive. It can survive through infected animals. It can survive through maybe midges that they haven't been fully killed. They're in a nice quiet shed, in a warm shed, surviving. It can survive through pregnant animals having an infected offspring a few months later. So it overwintered in the Netherlands, in Belgium, and in Germany. And then since August 2024, it really took off, and it spread rapidly to France, Luxembourg, Denmark, Switzerland, Norway, the Czech Republic. In fact, it's spread even further since then. And of particular interest to us, of course, is the situation in Great Britain. So last sort of autumn, winterish, they had some cases along the very, very east coast of England, 126 cases. And they were caused by midges blowing across from the Netherlands and Belgium, across the North Sea, across the English Channel, I suppose I should say, on the wind. But because it was in autumn, there was no local transmission. So the midges blew over, bit some animals, which were detected, but it was already getting a bit cold and there was no subsequent local transmission in those areas and no clinical signs. The animals didn't become very sick. So, our colleagues in that area, the very eastern bit of England, the farmers and vets there, kind of got away with it. But the first outbreak of 2024 was then confirmed towards the end of August. And very quickly it spread. Now, remember, August, huge difference from November. Nice and warm, lots of heat, lots of midges around. And it spread right across over 150 premises across this red area that's highlighted on the map, and probably in more premises again. And there were several four-trace cases reported in Western England and Wales, including the island of Anglesey, which is, of course, quite a short distance from Ireland. These were cases where animals had moved from infected areas before they knew that area was infected. So nobody broke any rules, nobody violated any guidelines. But in the normal course of agriculture, people move cattle and sheep from Eastern England to Western England or Western Wales, and only subsequently discovered the areas they had come from was infected with Bluetongue. Those four trace cases were followed up by our English and Welsh colleagues, and there's been no subsequent local transmission detected in those areas. But this really highlights the risk to us, and I think we all know, how close these infected areas are to Ireland, and it's not a very far distance for midges to be blown over from England to Ireland. And of course, if things spread further in spring 2025 and Bluetongue were to spread to Western England or to Wales, that would be even more serious for us. But unfortunately, there has been more bad news on Bluetongue front. There is another strain called Bluetongue 12 detected in the Netherlands in October 2024, so just very recently. And this is the first time Bluetongue 12 has been detected in Europe. Unfortunately, there's no vaccine available for it, and this is regarded as a major risk for 2025. And it's something I think there's a lot of concern about. One of the problems is with the different types of Bluetongue. If an animal has been infected or vaccinated against a certain strain, it is not immune against a different one. So an animal that, for the sake of argument, became infected with Bluetongue 3 in 2024 is not going to be immune to Bluetongue 12 in 2025. So what are the implications of a Bluetongue outbreak? Why am I talking about this? Well, there are major implications for animal welfare. Animals become sick. They're a lot of pain. They can reduce productivity. There's a loss of our disease-free status. In Ireland, we depend on that to trade live animals and germinal products. And also, of course, there's a huge production loss for farmers who may have these cattle or sheep. So what are we doing to control this import risk? Well, there's animal health certification requirements if you want to bring animals from Europe into Ireland, and they help reduce that risk. There's a lot of requirements, blood sampling and things like that, that reduce that risk. There have been no imports at all permitted of susceptible species from Great Britain to Ireland since November 2023, since those first cases were detected. And once those cases were declared, we backtraced and tested all susceptible animals which had been imported in the period shortly before that. We do a lot of post-entry surveillance sampling of Bluetongue animals from mainland Europe. So if animals are imported from countries into Ireland, we blood sample them after they arrive, so that if the import controls haven't worked and an infected animal has arrived, that we hope to be able to detect it before there be onward spread. We carry out a lot of surveillance. We have an early warning system for this. We actively will go out to farms randomly selected in areas where we think midges are likely to have blown across to, and blood sample those for Bluetongue. And perhaps some people watching this have had that experience of having their farm sampled as part of a surveillance system. We're also testing a lot of aborted fetuses in our regional veterinary laboratories. So because abortions are one of the early signs of Bluetongue, all aborted fetuses are now tested for Bluetongue as part of a normal screening process. We work with colleagues in the Met Office and UCD to model where midges might spread from on the wind to Ireland. and that helps inform our surveillance. So these are just some screenshots of these models that we use. So our colleagues will place the source in parts of, could be England or northern France or the Netherlands, where there are Bluetongue outbreaks, and they'll model where on any given day the wind might be blowing midges to, and that helps us select which farms we will, which areas we will target for active surveillance. So we do that regularly to try to get a sense of where midges might pass to. Now, most of the time we have winds in Ireland predominantly coming from the west to the east, so that's in our favour. But there are plenty of days when, as we all know, we have an eastern wind or a southeasterly wind, which is ideal to blow midges across the Irish Sea, unfortunately, and that's a risk we may have to deal with in 2025. I want to talk for a little bit about vaccination for Bluetongue 3. There are 3 vaccines for Bluetongue 3 authorised for emergency use in the EU and the UK, and they're now in use in all affected countries. The vaccines don't fully stop infection or disease, but they do greatly reduce the level of sickness and reduce the amount of virus in the blood. So that's good news. But there's an important point I want to make. These are emergency authorised vaccines. They're only recently developed, and that's understandable because, of course, Bluetongue 3 wasn't an issue in Europe until quite recently. But as a result, these vaccines cannot be used currently to certify trade. So an animal which has been vaccinated with any of these 3 vaccines cannot be used for cannot trade, cannot move to another country within Europe. So a Bluetongue 3 vaccinated animal in France or Germany, the Netherlands, cannot be imported into Ireland currently. The principles that we will be applying if we have an incursion are the principles of effective disease control. Now, a lot of it with Bluetongue depends on the specifics. So, for instance, the time of year has a big influence. If we had a Bluetongue outbreak at the very end of autumn or the beginning of spring, before there was much midge activity, we would probably have a reasonable chance, if we detected early, of stopping it. On the other hand, if we had an incursion during the peak of summer, which is unfortunately what our European colleagues had to deal with, it could be very, very hard to stop it spreading if there's a lot of movement in, say, midges in, say, July and August. So we'll be putting in place movement controls and surveillance, certainly with the first few cases, putting in place a hard stop so that we could understand the epidemiological situation. Where has the virus come from? Where has it moved to? Is it just in the first farm we've discovered, or is it in other farms nearby? We've probably put in place an initial 20-kilometre temporary control zone with licensed movements in and out. That's so that we can get a handle on where things are. We may even need to apply movement controls even more widely in the first few days so that we can get a sense of where things are and stop it if we can. The initial goal would be to eradicate an initial incursion. So we would cull PCR positive animals at the start. Those are animals that tested positive to the virus. And I think it's likely that since vaccines are available, that unless we were very fortunate and unless we were very confident that we had stopped an incursion early, we probably would look at vaccination. So the response to a confirmed outbreak will depend on a number of variables. So this, for instance, the season, the time of year, where the restriction zone would be, the epidemiological situation, the tracings. For instance, is it a farm which has had several movements out of that farm in the days before infection was discovered? We would look at licensed movements in the affected area to stop disease spreading to other parts of Ireland. We'll be doing a lot of surveillance, that's passive surveillance and active surveillance, going out and blood testing animals to see is infection there, asking people to report any suspicion of disease. We really want to try our very, very best to get ahead of this because we do have a chance to stop it spreading if we can get to it quickly. So a key point I'd like to make to you is, if you see clinical signs and think, this looks like it could be Bluetongue, please, please, please report the suspect case to regional veterinary office immediately by telephone. Ask to speak to the VI on duty urgently to report the suspect. Isolate the sick animals indoors. They can be treated with anti-inflammatories at an early stage to alleviate clinical signs. And again, I want to emphasize Bluetongue is not zoonotic. That means it does not infect people. The meat products, milk are all safe for human consumption. And it's important that we keep that in mind. We don't want to people to form the incorrect impression that there is a risk to humans. As I said at the start, the risk to humans is from the impact of watching, your cattle, your sheep become ill. It doesn't infect you. So just to wrap it up, I think there's a lot of questions over the future. What can happen next? What do we face in 2025? Well, to simplify it, the good scenario is no infected animals are reported, no infected semen or embryos are reported, and if infected midges do blow over here from Great Britain or France, any infected animals are rapidly spotted. The farmer reports the suspicion of disease. We go out there, and the first outbreak is effectively controlled before it spreads more widely. And that's what I hope will happen in 2025. But we also have to be realistic. Things might not work out that way. It's possible that animals or semen or embryos could be imported from an infected area on the continent before local authorities have discovered it. For instance, you might bring in animals from a part of France where Bluetongue is present, but people do not yet know that Bluetongue is present. Midges could blow over from Great Britain or France, bringing infection with them. Infected animals might become sick, but it might not be noticed. Or if it's noticed, it might not be reported, or at least not quickly. Midges may spread it locally, especially if it's during the summertime and there's lots of midges around. And by the time we detect Bluetongue 3, it may have spread widely into the affected region. I hope that won't happen. And I hope that, part of the reason that I'm giving this talk is to encourage people to take those steps that can reduce the likelihood of us having to face that in 2025. We have a video on the Department of Agriculture website, a little YouTube video on how to keep bluetongue out of Ireland. If you'd like to look at that, I encourage you to do so. It's quite short and it just covers those key points about where the risks are and what can be done to reduce those risks. So look, just to wrap it up, my take-home message is please watch out for cattle and also any sheep or goats that you have which might have bluetongue. If you do think they've bluetongue, please do report it to the department so we can act quickly. And I understand, of course, nobody particularly wants to have the department out to their farm, but this is a chance where we may really be able to get ahead of bluetongue. We do have a chance in Ireland of stopping, finding it early and stopping it spreading. And it's a chance that our colleagues in other countries didn't have. So let's take that chance. Don't import cattle or germinal products is the best way to reduce the risk. If you do import cattle or germinal products or sheep, please do follow the guidance, adhere to the rules, and think about the risk yourself. We've more information on the department website, gov.ie/bluetongue. And thank you very much. And I really hope that this has been useful for you. And I will leave it at that.
Great, thanks, Owen. Okay, great, thanks, Owen. So, listen, very serious topic. It's as you say, it's thank God it's not in at the moment, hopefully, and we want to keep it out. And if it does come in, as you're saying, we want to get on top of it very, very quickly. Just on in terms of a couple of questions before we wrap it up, and I know it's probably hard to answer, but is it what's the likely route for it to come in? Like, is it most likely that it'll come in through animals and germinal products, or is the risk of midges spreading it just as high?
Thanks, Pierce. Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think it partially depends on the time of year and partially on our understanding of what's happening. So at this time of year, when we're recording this, it's November 24. I think the risk of it blowing over in midges from central England or from France is far lower right now because temperatures are dropping. It was quite a cold morning this morning here where I am. It was about 4 degrees when I got up. So there's lower chance now of it blowing in and infected midges. And because we have a lot of controls in place, we've stopped all imports from Great Britain since November 23. If you look at the risks that haven't been fully closed off, I think there is a risk of importing it through cattle or sheep or germinal products from mainland Europe. That is a risk that we haven't fully closed off, even though there's import controls in place, and there's certification requirements in place, and we are following those, and we do post-import testing. That is still a risk. Whereas when it gets to next spring, say, maybe May, June, the weather heats up, if bluetongue spreads more widely again, we'll be back to a major risk of midges blowing, not just from England, but possibly from France towards the east coast and the southeast.
Okay, great. And in terms of the vaccine, Owen, is that something that is being developed in terms of new strains? Is it something we could see down the line as being a standard vaccine if it does become so serious?
Yes, I think so. One point that I'd make is for some of the older bluetongue strains, which have been in countries in Europe for years, there's long established vaccines. So, perhaps if people have worked in the continent, they might be familiar with vaccines for Bluetongue 4 or Bluetongue 8. And those are standard vaccines. They're very well known. They've been in place for many years. When Bluetongue 3 emerged, the pharma companies developed, and in fairness to them, they did a very good job. They developed very quickly 3 different vaccines for Bluetongue 3. and they help to reduce that impact. And they don't completely prevent disease, but they reduce the impact on animals and the likelihood of death and sickness. So it's still early days. I think there's, a lot of farmers have to choose for themselves, depending on the country, whether they choose to vaccinate or not. And I think seeing your neighbour's stock dying or becoming ill is a great incentive to do that. Those vaccines are available in England, in the infected areas, and in the affected parts of other European countries. And certainly, if we did have an incursion which became established here, I think there'd be a very strong case to introduce the vaccines here. So the I think as the situation develops, I think the drug companies do focus on developing them. And unfortunately, if Bluetongue does get established here, I could absolutely see a situation where it would become an important vaccine for people to think of. And I think that's a situation that farming colleagues in Eastern England and Northern France and in the Netherlands now find themselves in.
Okay. And the test, the PCR test or that or other tests, how quick can you get results back? So if a farmer does have a suspected animal today, the VI and the department, the DVO come out, how quickly can you verify whether it is or it isn't?
Yeah, there's two tests. So there's the test for the virus itself, which is the PCR test, and then there's a test for antibodies to the virus, which is an ELISA test. And that's a little bit similar to what people might be familiar with from diseases like BVD or other diseases like that. At the moment, of course, we don't have Bluetongue here, and the only animals which would be antibody positive are those which have been vaccinated in the continent and then imported here. Um, I think if there's a suspect case and our staff go out and take samples, we'd expect the result maybe within a day or two, and we'd expect those results back quite quickly. The situation would change, of course, if Bluetongue became established here, where we'd be focusing on trying to stop it spreading further. So at the moment, I think we'd expect the results within a day or two, and hopefully take action very quickly if we had bad news there.
Right. And just the last thing then, Owen, I suppose, paradoxically, we're probably benefiting from Bluetongue at the moment with the trade of live weanlings and that going to parts of the world where they're restricted in buying weanlings from maybe Bluetongue areas and that. How quickly would that affect our trade if it doesn't land in here in terms of the live trade, especially?
Yeah, it's a big risk, Pierce. It would affect it very, very quickly. There would be so moving animals from Bluetongue affected areas. There's quite complex certification requirements in place, and I think it would add a level of complexity and expense to exporting animals that would make the export trade a lot more challenging than it is. So that's a significant issue.
Okay. Hopefully it won't come to that. Listen, Owen, thanks a million for giving that presentation there now, but also for giving it, as we said, at the Beef Conference this year on the 19th of November. Okay, just to thank everybody that gave the presentations at the Beef Conference. So there was 6 presentations given in total. There's also a conference proceedings. So the presentations, similar to what we've done here today with Owen, a recording of those are all available on the Teagasc website, as is the conference proceedings. People want to go in and watch any one of those presentations, you're more than welcome. Just finally, just want to thank you, the listener and the viewers, for coming on and watching this, but also finally to thank Owen once again for giving this presentation.
You're very welcome. Thank you for the invitation, Bruce. Thank you.
Owen.